Welcome to One Day in a Wake Up, a show about doing time, getting out, and where you are now. In prison slang, one day in a wake up means you're almost free. Just one more day before they walk you out the gate. So let's walk out together. One Day in a Wake Up on Colorado Radio for Justice. I just want to thank you for joining us on this. Kind of appropriate, right?
Yeah, very appropriate. It was well timed.
Thank you for joining us on Colorado Radio for Justice. This is our podcast, One Day in a Wake Up. And what we'd like to do today is talk to you, my new friend Pam. I'll have you introduce yourself. And, you know, basically we don't want to marinate too much in prison. We want to kind of think about the feelings that you had the day before you got out, you know, what that transition was out the gate, and you know where you are now. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Pam Clifton. I'm the manager of constituent services for the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. I got out of prison the second time in 2002. 2002, yeah, in February of 2002, yeah. And I went to prison the second time because I didn't figure it out the first time. So
you've actually had One Day in a Wake Up twice?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. But they were both pretty much the same, just because I went to, when I left prison, I went to the halfway house both times.
Okay.
And so that's a little different than, you know, kicking rocks out the gate.
Right.
But the feelings are still the same. So I did things a little differently than I had done in the past, because I'm going to use some jargon. I hope you guys don't mind.
Not at all, no.
I fell out of
Speak from
Weld
the heart.
County the first time, and I didn't want to go back there, so I went to Fort Collins. And when I fell out of Larimer County, I was sitting up in Canyon and thinking about things. I realized that going back to that was not in my best interest. And so I decided to go to Denver, and I had to kind of finagle my way out of prison and into a Denver halfway house, because the rules said that you had to go back to where you came from,
right,
or you had to be able to parole to somebody where you were going to the halfway house, and I didn't actually know anybody here, so I think I paroled to a vacant lot. Because nobody really checked back then.
You just gave them an address?
Yeah, I was like, here's an address.
Perfect.
And, but a lot had happened in the last couple years of my journey through DOC, and really made me start to think about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And so I was willing to take on the challenge of going somewhere where I didn't know anybody, and I knew things were different. And so while I was in the second time, right before I went in, you know, like computers had showed up, and and people were still on pagers. Right. Nobody had phones yet, but when I got out, people had phones. And so, you know, technology aside, there was other things. I mean, all of a sudden now they could do background checks. When I got out of prison, they couldn't do background checks, right? You could just go and apply for a job, apply for housing or whatever, and it was not an issue.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it was an issue. And so getting out, you know, when I got out of prison, I had a box of papers, right? And I had, you know, your little sweats with your name on it, and some crappy shoes, and my check for $3.18, which was the sum total of my savings that I had when I got out. And my mom, God bless her, sent me $5 because my mom.
So we got $8.
I've got $8.13, and I went over to King Soopers with my little DOC ID, and they took it and took 10% and gave me the rest, and I got, you know, some fruit and a pack of cigarettes. It was like, all right, here I go, you know. And it was interesting because I'd never ridden the bus before. I'd never used mass transportation. You know, all of those things.
So you're out. you're in Denver, you're in a new city. You said after your second term, though, you started having like a change in vision for your future. Was there a moment or something that happened while you were in prison that caused that paradigm shift? Or was it just, I'm back in prison again, I got to change?
It was a couple of things. And so when I got to DOC, I was pregnant. And on Christmas of '98, I went into labor. And I went to the chow hall for, and we were just timing contractions, right? They're about 15 minutes apart. And I stopped at control on the way back because we left the chow hall when it was 5 minutes apart. And I told the guard on duty, I said, hey, Miss Wilkes, my contractions are 5 minutes apart and I need to see medical. And she said, go back to your unit. There's plenty of women down there that know how to birth babies.
Oh my gosh.
And so until 6 p.m. that night, I was in my room, and then there was a shift change, and the officer who came on at that point looked quite alarmed at my appearance and had somebody come down and take me to medical. And the only person that was on at medical was a Medline nurse. And the Medline nurse said, well, I don't think you're in labor. And I said, I promise you I'm in labor. I know I'm in labor. She said, well, your water hasn't broken. I said, my water never breaks. It's a medical condition. If you look in my file, then you would know all of these things. Right. And she said, well, I don't think you're in labor. And I said, can you at least check the fetal heart monitor to make sure the baby's not in distress? And she said, well, I don't know how to work one of those. I said, oh, what is your maternity experience? And she said, well, I mostly work with goats.
Oof.
So she sent me back to the unit. And 2 days later, when the doctors finally came in, because everybody was gone for Christmas and it was over the weekend,
right,
the doc took one look at me and sent me to the hospital. And my doctor examined me and he said, Pam, I'm sorry, but your daughter died trying to be born. And so she wrapped the cord around her neck a couple of times and tied it in a few knots, and they sent me back to prison and brought me back to the hospital and induced labor. And I gave birth to a beautiful 6-pound, 8-ounce, red-haired baby girl who was stillborn. When they sent me back to the unit, when they sent me back to the prison, they sent me to see the psychiatrist, who was a 6'5", 300-pound, 68-year-old man who said, oh, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. I'm going to give you a Valium and everything will be fine. And that was the sum total of the mental health that DOC provided at the time. And so they got me out of there as soon as I was medically cleared. But what I realized at that moment was that I wasn't in prison by myself. I was there with 300 other women, and we were all going through the same thing. None of us were seen. None of us were understood. We were all traumatized, and nobody really cared.
Right.
And nobody actually knew we were there. You know? It was a long time ago. And so I had an inkling at that point that I wanted to do something to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I'd been in the restaurant business my entire life, right? That's all I did. And so I wanted to do something different. And then they took my kids and put them up for adoption because that was the law, right? If you have a 6-year prison sentence, your kids are out of there. It doesn't matter. If you don't have family to take them, they're gone.
Right.
And so those two things combined kind of kicked my ass. But it was in New Year's Eve, 1999. So it was
Y2K.
Y2K.
I remember that moment.
Yeah. And
I was
so,
in CSP.
Yeah, well, I was down the street in the hole and on the other side of the hill.
Yep.
And it was at that minute that I knew that I was going to be on a different trajectory, that I needed to change, that I had to stop worrying about whether or not I could fight the system or somehow manipulate it or get around it, whether it was probation or parole or prison or ComCorp, whatever, and learn to be smarter inside the system and figure out how to get through it that way. And that was when things started to change. That's when I went to the horse program. And so I learned to train horses. And I learned about patience and being thoughtful. And I'd never really had that opportunity before. So I was different when I got out than when I went in.
Wow, heavy. The thoughts that I'm having right now is super duper sad for that beautiful baby girl, but it almost sounds like she saved your life.
She absolutely did.
So I think it is kind of a happy ending, but it was sad, and I wasn't expecting to hear that.
Oh.
But what I can say is I can relate also because my mom and dad died leaving a visit while I was in prison.
Oh.
And 15 minutes. So you see, like, that's why, I can feel this.
I'm so sorry.
But that was that's the
defining moment.
A defining moment in my life, because up to that second when they told me I was a horrible heroin addicted gangbanger.
Yeah.
That was my life. And then so I can totally relate to that sacrifice, that loss, but how it can wake us up a little bit, and it's like, oh wait. Oh.
Where am I?
What am I doing?
What am I doing here? They had a judgment call at some point that I didn't.
Yeah, I'm having a staff meeting with myself right now. Like, we got to get some stuff straightened out. But, yeah, what a heavy hit. Yeah, my condolences. I also think
mine as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, honey.
Yeah, no, it was.
I can't even imagine.
Oh, it was terrible. They wouldn't let me go to the funeral because of my write-up history.
Yep, they wouldn't let me go to the funeral because I didn't have $700.
Well, I had the money. I had the money. I actually, my folks lived in a small town in southern Colorado, in San Luis, Colorado.
Yeah.
I had but the sheriff of San Luis called the warden. I'm in a private. I'm in Walsenburg.
Okay.
And said, hey, if you're worried about security, we'll throw some additional cops on board, but on behalf of this, it's a small town.
Yeah.
On behalf of the citizens of San Luis, we would like Seth here. And no, it was because of my write-up history. I'm like, how long do you got to be write-up free before you can attend your mom and dad's funeral? Like,
right?
What is that, 90 days?
Yeah.
180 days? Like, what are we talking about here, guy? Anyway.
Oh, my God.
And apparently DOC said yes, but because I was in a private, it was left up.
Core Civic, was it Core Civic?
CCA.
CCA, yeah.
Yeah. And so DOC had to cough it up to the warden, and that warden, he wouldn't even talk to me until the day after the funeral, and he called me back into his office. And my little brother saved that man's life. He's 16. He was at home waiting on mom and dad to come back from the visit, and they never showed back. And he's like, brother, do not do anything. I need you out here. Don't do nothing. Please promise me. I'm like, I promise? All right, I promise I won't, but I would,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was at that point in my life. I'm like, my case manager came out bawling, wanting to quit her job. She was like, I'm not working here no more. I can't believe they're not letting you go. I'm quitting, in tears. She's crying for me. I'm like, don't quit your job. You live in Walsenburg. You're not going to find another one.
Right.
So.
No, I had a guard walk up to me when I came back from the hospital right before they induced that gave me a hug. And she was like, I'm so sorry. And she got fired the next day.
So she came up to give you a hug and she got fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the DOC we know and love so well, and it's in all facets. It's in medical, mental health, and
case management,
familial well-being, all of it. It was, and it's probably not much better. I've been out 15 years, but all the reports I get, it's basically the same.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no staff.
Right.
Now, there's no trained staff. You have all the 18-year-olds are up there. You know, they're hiring anybody.
Right.
You know, if you got a heartbeat and a GED, you can get a job at DOC.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
And so you get the medicals like, I don't think you're in labor.
Yeah.
Like you just looked at me and said that with your X-ray vision.
Right, with your superpowers, all of your medical superpowers.
Well, I feel like you're not pregnant.
Exactly.
You're not in labor. Terrible. But the horses, I want to talk about the horses. Like I'm really glad that fell into your life after that moment. Like I bet you.
It was literally what saved my life.
I can see.
Because I knew I wanted to do something, but I couldn't get out, and I was frustrated by that, and I was plumbing, I was doing welding, I was doing, there was nothing fulfilling. I was just like staying busy, right? And I heard about this program, and I went to my case manager, and I said, if you let me in this program, I'll stop asking you to get me out. And she said, I can do that. And so I was one of 10 women. And we went over to a section right behind, where the wild horse program is over off of Fremont. And the first day that I was there, they brought in, I think, 20 of these yearlings. And they were wild horses, and they were a year old, and they'd never seen people before, and they were just taken away from their mothers. And so we had a bond from that, a trauma bond almost. And so you would sit in a round pen, right? And they'd let this little horse in, and the sides of the pen are covered, right? And they can't see out. And my job is to get them to trust me without forcing them to do that. So I had to be small. And so I'd sit in the middle of the round pen, and they're running around, and their head is over the bar, right? They're trying to smell freedom, and they don't know what I am. They don't know if I'm a mountain lion or a rattlesnake or what. They just know that I'm new and I could be dangerous. And so I'd have to sit there until they slowed down enough to be curious. And I couldn't rush it. And at first, you do that. You're like, oh, they're slow. I can get up and go. No. Nope.
Wild horse.
Nope. You're going to sit your down, and you're going to wait until they decide that you're safe. And sometimes that took hours. Sometimes that took days. But the layers of patience that you have to learn, and the ability to discern the mood of this horse by the subtlety of a body movement, a muscle twitch, the way their ears are going, how they're breathing, astounding, amazing. And I brought that with me when I got out.
I would be so scared to sit in that pen. And I can imagine the patience that it would take, and it's like you and the wild horse are learning the same thing at the same time.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. That through trauma, love still exists.
Yeah.
And then I decided to come to Denver. There's not a lot of horses. And so I had to kind of let go of that and focus on other things. And so I had to get a job. And I was focusing on trying to get my kids back because they adopted my son out at the age of 5, and they put my daughter through 23 foster homes. And so when they took my kids, they were 4 and 7. And there was never any abuse or anything. I got picked up on 1 gram and 3/4 of methamphetamine and given 6 years. And so, yay, Fort Collins.
And besides the time, like just all the other factors, like what a heavy sentence for,
yeah,
an addict.
Well, it was the hitting a fly with a sledgehammer, and that was kind of their philosophy then. So So getting out meant that I was going to continue to call social services and say, where are my kids? And they kept saying, we can't tell you that, Pam. And I'd say, I need to know if my kids are alive or happy. And they'd say, well, you know, we can tell you that they're okay. And I said, that doesn't tell me much. And then about 2 years into it, and I was working. I lived in a very, very small town. I got a job, telemarketing, but it was not like the sheriff's department. It was to raise money for nonprofits, right? And so, but it was national. And so it was Greenpeace, Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Democratic National Committee. It was big, big organizations. And so I took that opportunity to not only learn how to raise money, but to learn about all of these organizations and what they stood for and what politics meant. Because I knew if I was going to change stuff, it was going to have to be through policy. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When they took my kids, when I was in DOC, I started writing letters to anybody that I thought could do something, because it just felt so wrong. And so it was Freedom Institutes and Parents Against whatever, and I wrote one to the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, and was like, is there anything I can do? Can anybody help me with this?
Right.
The one I got back from the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center was from their intern, and her name was Christy Donner. And so Christy, who's now been my boss for 25 years, wrote back and was like, I have no idea what to say to you right now, but I'm really, really sorry. And so we wrote back and forth a little bit, and she came up to see me. Bless her heart. And she brought an intern from DU named Julia Yu, who's a pretty famous attorney out in California now, a civil rights attorney. And so they wanted to start the Women's Prison Project. And then when I got out, I called Christy, and she said, well, do you want to start helping and working on this? And I was like, I need to wait until I'm off parole. Because if I start talking bad about DOC, it would be bad. And I'm currently suing the Department of Corrections, so that adds a layer of difficulty. And so she said, okay. And so I used that time to learn as much as I could about politics and about how policies change and what the difference is and how a bill becomes a law, you know, the whole gamut. And I did that and I worked 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, and put money in the bank. And that's what I did, and that's all I did. And after about 2 years, me and my friend got a house over in West Wash because I got a phone call from Human Services, and they said, hey, Pam, do you want your daughter back? I said, why? What'd you do to her? And they said, yeah, she's kind of a handful. And so my child refused to be adopted. And so anytime they put her in an adoption placement, she'd raise hell, she'd run away, she'd cause problems. And she'd tell them, you can't adopt me out because you'll change my name and my mom can't find me. And she's gonna find me.
She got that wild horse spirit too, yo.
She's a bit of a handful. And so, yeah. So they gave Ash back. They made me go take like a psych test, and I took this psych test, and the psychologist said, well, we got the results of your psych test back. And I was like, oh, really? And they said, yeah, you're normal. I was like, no kidding. It took you guys 7 years in a psych test to figure that out. No. But then they gave her back. And they gave her back, and she was a mess. And so,
how old was she again at that point?
14.
14?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the struggle has been real with her for 20 years. And so we still struggle to this day. But
I mean, that's the recipe for disaster is taking a child and running them through 23 foster homes. I mean, that's
when she believes that she's a princess that lives in Camelot,
right.
And they show up at school, she's in 3rd grade, they walk in, pick her up, take her to the office, and she never comes home again. I mean, yeah. And my son, they adopted him out to a family in Delta, and they had taken them both there, but Ash acted out, and so they said, we're going to keep him, but we don't want her. And so that layered on top of all of the other oppositional defiant, 19 different diagnoses. They had her on all kinds of meds, and all she had was trauma from being ripped out of her house. That's the only thing that was wrong with her. But she was over-medicated. They put Dalton on ADHD meds. He didn't have ADHD because it was an older couple, and they didn't want to deal with all that energy.
Mm-hmm.
When he was 15, Ash knew where he was. They kept in contact with each other secretly through something called MySpace. Do you remember MySpace?
I do.
And so she came to me one day and said, Mom, Dalton's playing in a football game in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. Holyoke maybe, or something. Should we go see him? And I said, because they wouldn't allow me to see him, and after she came home to me, they wouldn't allow her to speak to him either. And because somehow I was going to influence Dalton. So we showed up at the football game, and I thought we'd just be lost in the crowd, it was outside. And there was one set of bleachers about 12 feet long with 4 people on it. And I was like, oh.
Not that big of a game
This
today.
is not big of a game.
Is this preseason?
Yeah. So we sat on the lowest rung, and Ash pointed out, and she said, I think there's Dalton. He had his name on the back of his shirt. And at some point, he turned around and looked at us and recognized Ash and looked at me and said, are you my mom? And after the game, we only had just a minute because he had to get back on the bus. And I went to him and I said, I need you to know 2 things. First of all, none of this was your fault. And second of all, I love you with everything that I am. And if you ever need to come home, and if you ever want to come home, there's always a home for you. So when I went to prison, it was July 17th, 1998. And on July 16th, 2012, my son called me and said, Mom, can I come home now? Because he had just turned 18 and graduated from high school. And so on July 17th, I drove the Honda over the mountain, put everything he owned in it, drove him back, and I had all my kids home.
What an adventure. Wow. I can't even imagine the emotions first of all, as a parent, to be able to say those 2 things in that moment to him. I don't know if I would have been able to even speak, or I think I would have shown up with anger, like, where's your parent or your other parents type thinking,
Yeah.
But you step to him as a mother should, as a parent should, and that probably led him back, that statement, I would say, to know that, like, wow, that's my actual mother, and I felt that.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, he quit the football team and became a musician because that's what he had always wanted to do, and he felt like he could do that then.
Wow.
And he still is.
Just letting that settle for a second. That scene was amazing. Say that year again, what year did he turn 18?
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay. And you got out in 2002? Mm-hmm. So there was that 10-year window where he's out there. That felt better than parole, probably picking him up. Probably.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
What year did you kill your number?
'04.
'04.
Yeah. June 17th, my mom's birthday, 2004. And I called Christy. I said, okay, I'm ready now.
Let's get him.
Yeah. And she said, let's go have coffee. And so we went down to the Starbucks over off of, and sat down and had coffee and talked about it. And I joined her in the closet. So we had an office the size of a large bathroom.
A prison cell.
It was a little bigger than 6 by 9, but not much. and we were in the inner city parish, and I think it used to be a storage closet, but we were there for a year or so, and just getting my feet wet, right, and doing my best to raise money for the organization, and trying to understand what we were doing, and all of it, I mean, I was fresh off the boat. And so we'd go down to the Capitol, and neither one of us knew what we were doing. And Christy had a better idea. She'd run a couple pieces of legislation, but it was, I'd still wear a suit every time I walked in there. And then I had that, so when I got my daughter back, I went in and they reinstated my parental rights, which was I was probably one of 4 people that ever happened to at that point.
Right.
And the judge, the juvenile judge, was blind. And I asked him, when they did that, I said, I'd had attorneys that told me for a couple of years, that will never happen. There is no way that's going to happen. And so when I went in and I said, Judge, can I ask you something? He said, yeah. And I said, I thought this could never happen. He said, anything that's a law can change. And a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, oh, and you put your pants on one leg at a time too, right? Yeah. And the hierarchies and the barriers and that you build for yourself around who's who and what's available and what you can do and what you can't do just came crumbling down. And all of a sudden I was on the same playing field as everybody else. And I just had to learn how to fight smarter for what we needed.
Justice is blind.
Justice is blind.
Yeah, I mean, that was Lady Justice in disguise, like, hey, you can actually change the world.
Yeah.
Whew. What a moment.
Yeah.
I'm trying to picture you and Christy just maneuvering through the halls, and, like...
There's a lot of smoking outside. Yeah. and trying to figure out who people were, and how things worked, right? So we'd sit in hearings. You sit in committees, or not committees, but just how hearings work and how testifying works and who's on what side, and what, all of it. There's so much. It's just so much. It seems like it's really big, and then you figure out it's not very big after all. It's actually really small. And I learned how to go and tell my story at the table in 2 minutes or less, right? And so we'd pick apart the legislation that was happening, and I could overlay my life, right, with the judicial system basically across every piece of legislation that we did.
Right.
And I could tell them something and how this actually affected human beings. And how they could change that and how it could be better. And it took a while, but I can do that now. We passed legislation so that personal amounts of illegal drugs are no longer a felony, they're a misdemeanor. Siblings can't be taken apart from each other if they're in foster care. If you're pregnant, you can't go to prison. Sentencing is delayed up to 2 years.
Wow.
And so just all of that, right? And so much more. So much more. But being able to take all of the emotion and pain and anguish that happened and turning it into something positive, that's what I learned sitting watching that little horse run around the pen. Right?
Wow, what a journey. What a great journey. I just see so many full circle moments in your life when, like, really, you know, yeah, you didn't have to follow through with your retribution from DOC, but you're getting it still, you know what I mean, through all of the policy change that you're doing.
Thank you.
You're still getting your retribution, you know, so I think that's...
The point is that nobody could ever go through what I went through because of the legislation we've passed.
Yeah.
It's impossible for that to happen.
Oh,
and that was the point.
Yeah.
To make sure that that could never happen to somebody else again.
It shouldn't have happened to you, but I'm grateful for your, you know, not giving in to that. You know what I mean? It would have buckled a lot of people, like, into, you know, kind of get on your proverbial horse and ride out of there and, you know, right into the OK Corral. Like, you went right in, like, let's go. Awesome. If you could talk to a woman that just stepped out today, sweatpants, name tag, weird shoes, $3.17. Was it $3.17?
$3.18.
$3.18.
Yep.
My bad. You know, what's your best advice to this person? You know, just stepped out. Which way do I go? You know, do you have any words for that person?
I think my best advice for them is to breathe. Breathe whenever things get overwhelming, because everything's going to be overwhelming. Because you're going to go from 3 miles an hour, for how long did you live there, to 75 miles an hour in the matter of hours.
Right.
And so it's going to be like going from an island being dropped into the middle of the city. You haven't made decisions. You haven't been exposed to colors. You haven't been exposed to humans. And so people are going to bump into you or walk up on you, or you're going to walk into 7-Eleven and the amount of choices is just going to be so overwhelming. Remember to breathe. Remember to put your back against a wall and just take a deep breath when things get overwhelming. Remember to call your support. Find who's out there that supports you, that won't judge you, that is, whether it's a wages organization, whether it's a church, whether it's the people in your life, make sure that they're aware that prison is traumatic. And that's not a joke. So PTSD is a very, very real thing when you come out, and it has to be treated like that because nobody will talk about it. So the most important thing is remember that in your list of priorities, the number one reason that you want to be out, the number one reason for you to stay sober, the number one reason is because of your freedom. And never let go of that. Because your freedom is the most important thing that you have.
Yeah, you just took me right back to that moment, sitting in the pen, learning patience for the first time, you know, and, you know, so yeah, the people that didn't have that opportunity, that's great advice. You know, it's not about go get a job right away. It's like all that stuff will happen, but you got to be present, patient, and breathe. No, I really like that advice. I wish somebody would have told me that before my stumbles when I got out, but.
My first ride on RTD was going in the wrong direction. I had to get off and walk back to the halfway house because it was before cell phones in a snowstorm in Denver, and I had no idea where I was. And so it was like I had to take all of that and just say, okay, the mountains are behind me, and I need to go that way. Through neighborhoods, backyards, I need to go.
That's great. I feel like I could talk to you all day for sure. been a...
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I can't tell you how much, because I hate doing this.
Oh, you did wonderful, and I thank you for this opportunity just to, hear your story and to be inspired by not giving up and not letting the things that have happened, the trauma that we've experienced define us, or if it does define us, it can define us properly.
Differently. And it's a matter of perspective, right? You don't have to do things, you get to do things. Yeah. I tell people that all the time. I can remember sitting in a prison and people would be leaving for court, and I want to go to court. I don't care what for. I just want to go, right? I have to go to the doctor. I want to go to the doctor,
Yeah.
I get to be human. And it's important to change your perspective on that, just that one thing.
Truth.
You get to be alive.
Yeah, it's all, we're just here for a blip and, enjoy it, don't give it away. We were talking about that PTSD. There's one called PIS, post-incarceration syndrome, and it's a little bit different, but it's specified to the, the PTSD that's, and it's,
It's chronic, it's like chronic PTSD or complex PTSD, I think. Because it's not one event, it's just an ongoing series of events where you're always under that kind of pressure. You never feel safe. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it eats at you, wears away. It's,
Yeah, I'm touched. I suffer, but this is my medicine. You know, and I think you found your medicine, and
it's all about love and sunshine. So if you have love and sunshine, then you're going to be okay.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No return, it took a couple round trips in order for me to learn, and I ain't never going back. Allow me to be exact. You let pain run its course till you're forced to adapt in the worst habitat. Speaking matter of fact, zigzagging through this maze with my brain still intact. Progress is the phase, the rest is just cap. What lurks after that? Fresh air don't care when you spent light years in a prison, shifting gears with the friction and the tears. Addictions in the rear. Model for your peers, that's the sum of all fears. This is not a hot take. One day and awake till a steak on my plate. Kiss from my mate, life reanimate. Exist to be great, let your thoughts elevate. Bend but don't break, cause your past and your future can no longer correlate.
One Day and a Wake Up is a production of Colorado Radio for Justice. Check out CRJ at radioforjustice.org and across social media at Radio for Justice. This episode of One Day and a Wake Up was produced by me, Taylor Hanson, along with Seth Reddy. Executive producers for this show are Herbert Alexander, Ryan Conero, Taylor Hanson, and Seth Reddy. Our theme music is by Herbert Alexander. This is One Day and a Wake Up.